just hope that all is well in that regard. And once they're on board, then of course we can talk about the subject matter for today's program. Okay, and today's program will be tremendous. It will be fantastic. Okay, it will be fantastic. So watch this space. And I can say this with a certain confidence because I've been around for long enough. Okay, and I've seen enough of life to recognize that there are patterns, you know, and those patterns are the beneficial patterns, okay, or patterns which, well, harm us in the medium and long term, but in the short term seem to be self-gratifying. Okay, so I'm not going to say any more on that, but I want that to come out in future weeks. But what I will say is that a family that stays together grows together. Yeah, a family that stays together grows together. Okay, so let's begin to turn my attention to the subject matter for today's show. Okay, and here it is, and here it is. I've been challenged recently about the fact that the show is pretty focused on my own community, continental Africans and Africans from the Caribbean. And I suppose you're right, it is. Okay. For good reason, if I may say so. It's important to hear members of my own community discussing matters of importance in public forums, so wider communities can hear our debate, our dialogue, how we conduct ourselves, okay? And the focus we place on a whole range of issues, okay? Because through that dialogue, one hopes that we heighten understanding of who the African communities are, you know? I could say Black communities, but we're actually Africans, you know? Let's be truthful, okay? Whether you're born in the Caribbean or not, our heritage is, of course, African. Okay. In the Americas, South or North, you know, we remain who we are, Although we have strong affiliation in the countries that we're born, of course, or the countries we reside, but our ethnic origins is clear, okay? Our cultural origins are clear. And if I may say so to others who want to dispute this, I say that we simply acknowledge that, you know? It should be acknowledged. Oh, okay, right, sorry about that. Slight technical problem with the technology we're using today. Ah, right then, there we go. Perfect, perfect. Yeah, so as I was saying, the show's focus is really on the African communities, and African communities come across in many flavors. And there's a whole community here in Britain that comes from the Caribbean, but of course, as a result are in the Caribbean because of an event which lasted hundreds of years called the transatlantic slave trade. And of course, that slave trade, the enslavement of my ancestors, of course, has resulted in millions of, tens of millions of my ancestors being in the Caribbean, in South America North America, and even here in Europe. And it's had a profound impact on the continent of Africa, indeed, a profound impact upon the history of Europe and America, particularly North America. And those profound impacts are being experienced today. Okay. And it therefore is an integral part of African history, an integral part of European history that we've got to look at, deconstruct, so that we can better understand the components that allowed it to happen and the impacts of still being experienced today. Okay. And of course, we live in Britain, we're in Britain. Okay. And the implications for us here in Britain is profound. It is profound in so many ways. So my guest today is to discuss what I consider to be the most important topic of the times. Yes, the energy crisis looms and is present, and I know for many it is hurting right now. But of course, for our own community, the continuing impacts of the latterly transatlantic enslavement of our ancestors has implications for us now and will have implications for our community for many decades to come. Okay. And I could quote a whole range of stats about the impact it's had on our community, but I won't. I'm going to soon go to my guest. But the necessity for us to speak about the subject is profound. Okay. And it's easy for us, as I said, talk about the energy crisis, talk about our health and so on, and not discuss the elephant in the room. Okay. And the elephant in the room it's not going away. You know, it's not going away. The elephant in the room will continue to impact our narrative. How we relate to other communities, you know, how they relate to us, their view of us, you know. In the attitude of other communities to African communities, okay, will be a central feature, I anticipate, of all interviews that I discuss when I discuss Africa and indeed our peoples here in the UK. Attitude of other communities to our communities. We suffer their attitudes. Okay. And that's why it's important to discuss it. Okay. And I want to ensure that as we discuss it in an honest, frank, open manner, that others are not offended by the discussion. You know, that's the other form we have. Others are offended, even discuss it, you know, or simply, well, coy. Why discuss it? Why remember? You know, why remember? You know, oh, look, here in the real world, okay, the past has defined the present, and the present will define the future. Okay. So unless we are clear, we understand the past, our future is uncertain. So clarity about the past is necessary so we can build a better future, lest we repeat the mistakes of the past. And repeating the same mistakes of the past without thought or process is extremely foolish and could easily result in, well, tragedy for our community. So I believe in my political world, we've got to look windward. You can look and see what's coming, okay? Anticipate, plan, prepare, so you're better able to survive the future and grow into the future. But we mustn't shy away from this most important of subjects. So today's program will focus on a really interesting organization, and you all might be able to see the backdrop we've created for this particular organization, the African Connections Consortium, a truly fascinating organization, truly fascinating, and has so many interesting facets to it. I wanted to be able to give light to it, because all too often I hear from ordinary Africans, men and women, young and old, who suggest that the only real organization we have in our community, and the faith community will understand what I'm about to say, are our churches and our mosque. You know, it's an interesting idea. You know, those are the real organization. But actually, there are hundreds of organizations who are secular, who are political, who are social, who are spiritual. You know, there are hundreds of them throughout the community. And they're all contributing to creating a positive, forward-thinking, aspirational African community. And the African Connection Consortium, and as it's always the case in our community, and it's been the case, and why this has been a focus for my shows this year, it's usually the women who display both the academic excellence, the social and spiritual awareness, and possess the charisma of 1,000 human beings, all rolled into one. And my guest today exemplifies the very best of our community. Elder Jendai So, are you on the line? Are you on the line?
Greetings, Brother Martin. Yes, I am.
Oh, and I like that calm, cool voice of yours. Good morning. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great, thank you. Giving thanks to be alive, giving thanks that the Creator has allowed me another day. Normally it doesn't start this early on a Saturday.
You're grateful.
Yes, but I'm pleased to be here, and I'm glad that you have clarified the sort of focus today, because I think we first kind of met and came into contact, and the invitation came as a result of my contribution to a recent Global African Congress CIS meeting on a Sunday Solidarity meeting. And so in that particular context, I was wearing the hats of the African Emancipation Day
Indeed.
Reparations March Committee, of which I am a co-chair.
Yes.
So there are several hats that I wear, and my logo for this Zoom happens to be African Connections Consortium, which is more of the global work I do from my Bristol base. So if we're going to talk about that, that's fine. But it all links into the wider reparatory justice work that I'm involved in.
Let's do that. Let's do that. And you're right. It all links. Okay. There is no mutual exclusivity here. And understanding those links is also an important step forward. I think before we begin, and you don't mind me calling Elder Jendai, because I have to say you're so learned, you know? Oh, come on now. I've observed your presentation, okay? And I have to tell you, previous week we had Professor Kevin Fenton, a acknowledged academic, okay? I want to acknowledge your status, okay? But I listened to you, you are illuminating, inspiring, motivating, okay? And that is a sign of a natural communicator. Professors, of course, natural communicators have to teach. You teach. I acknowledge you.
Well, give thanks, my brother. I mean, there are different types of knowledges. There are different types of knowing and ways of knowing. So, you know, I don't have letters before or after my name, but for me, that's not a problem. And I'm always on my own learning journey, as we should always be. So I'm hoping I can be of some assistance today.
You will. And I admire your modesty. Because I want to say to the listeners that indeed your presentation of the Emancipation March, on 1st of August, the grounding, yes. Yeah, okay, was one of the best presentations I've experienced, and I've lived a few decades. Okay,
so have I.
It was one of the best presentations, and that, I was sufficiently motivated by that. So, well, this intellect, this towering intellect, unacknowledged towering intellect, we need to give promotion to you. Okay, I want to encourage listeners from across the country to invite you to their meetings, you know, so that you can continue to communicate those key messages to the community. You know, that's what our young people demand. Sorry, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I mean, I wasn't sure. I assumed the focus would be around reparations, because that's the main body of my work at the moment. Where would you like us to start?
Let's start with reparations, because I certainly won't go to the African Connexions Consortium. Let's start with reparations, because it's pretty fundamental. And as you know, my involvement with the Global African Congress is testament to that. So it is pretty fundamental. And of course, it is possible, I'm going to assert, that the reparations movement has reached a junction point. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm interested to explore this junction point, what direction we will pursue, or would it be parallel directions that might happen. So let me set the scene for you, then we can ask you a further question. I'm aware that across Britain, there were a number of reparations organizations, okay? And each of them are engaged in reparations work, strands of work, okay? But of course, the biggest challenge in our community, of course, is collaborative activities, how to promote consistently collaborative activities. So we are able, each of us are supporting each of our initiatives, okay? The Global African Congress, of course, has consistently attended the Emancipation March on the 1st of Messiah. Although this year wasn't really a march, okay? And I'm going to have you explain the reason for that in a moment,
sure.
Okay? But more importantly, it's an opportunity, it should be an opportunity for all, the entire reparations community to congregate and support a very public outing. Okay. And of course, it has been going for some years, and the numbers keep wavering. Okay. So my first question to you, and as part of your intro, you might want to say a little bit more about yourself, but my first question to you, is the future of the reparations campaign here in Britain bright?
That is a question that requires different answers, because there is, as you say, different entities working in different ways in order to secure reparatory justice. And so each has their own trajectory and has their own interpretation of what reparations is and what reparations is when it is secured, achieved, etc. I tend to not want to start these conversations without us understanding, having a shared understanding, not necessarily agreement, but a shared understanding about what reparations is. And from my perspective, reparations and my understanding of it is formed by two things. One is the 5 principles under international law, of reparations, which are restitution, rehabilitation, compensation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. It's also informed by the need to have evolved that into our current context. And our current context also has to take account of the fact that ecocide is a precursor to genocide. And so when we talk about, because the African Connections Consortium and the African Emancipation Day Reparations March Committee are both connected to the Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign. So we have to...
There. I think just for my audience, you're using terminologies maybe unfamiliar. Okay.
Yes, I will come to that.
Yes, ecocide.
Absolutely. So let me just explain the connection and then the language. So it's important for us to include the ecological crisis and include environmental racism as part of the thing that is in need of repair. So when we talk about planet repairs, we're talking about reparatory justice combined with environmental justice, combined with cognitive justice. And cognitive justice is about the restoration of our own knowledge systems, those things that actually reconnect us back to our authentic selves. So, and that connection to our authentic self has been disconnected. Our development has been arrested by the Maangamizi, which we define as a continuum, and not only a continuum, but a continuum that starts with intentionality and continues with intentionality. And Dr. Malana Karenga, in his framing of that word, explains that Kiswahili term and its difference from the Maafa, because the Maafa as a great disaster applies to any type of disaster, whether it's a pileup on a motorway or an earthquake, anything like that. The Maangamizi talks about the intentionality to cause harm. And we see that harm expressed in a continuum which begins with enslavement of African people, to the colonization of African people, to the neo-colonization of African people and our land resources, our psychology, everything, and our knowledges. And that is pretty much the state we find ourselves in today. So reparations for us, ACC, African Connections, Stop the Maangamizi, and the March Committee, is not a term that we use synonymously with compensation, because that falls short of what holistic repair is. And so we try to explain it in its fullness, because it also tells us, therefore, what we need to do in order to secure reparatory justice if we're going to address things more than just through a monetary route.
Understood. So my question, of course, is, the future. What is your view of the future of the current campaign?
Right. So I don't have a crystal ball, but what I will say is that our strength to secure reparatory justice relies on our strength as a people. So if we remain a weak people, if we remain disconnected, if we remain non-contributors to our own liberation, then we shall get the outcome that our behavior is asking for. And so I cannot say about the level, excuse me, the level of brightness, but what I can say is that there has been significant progress, and I don't necessarily speak about things in my lifetime, because there was a time when our people could not consider and imagine themselves to be unchained, to not be working on plantations in that way. There are those that have sacrificed, that have resisted, and have brought us to this point. So there's always progress.
Thank you. Thank you. True, spoken like a true revolutionist. And I thank you for that. I thank you for that. And just take what you've just said further, if I may. So, of course, you're right. We're strong as our ability to come together around common aim and common purpose. Agreed. Okay. So that's the challenge as leaders. Okay, you're vice chair of the Emancipation March Committee. That is the challenge, isn't it? The leaders coming together, deliberately. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes and no, because I think we also have to understand that, you know, within whatever we are trying to address, there will always be different methodologies. There will always be a sense of different priorities. And I think that's okay. And all those different approaches, all those different strategies and tactics that the people themselves have come together to decide what needs to be done is what we refer to as an international social movement for African reparations, and ISMAR for short. So it's you know, I think we need to be realistic about this whole notion of so-called unity. And there are different types of unity. It isn't simply, you know, coming together, oh, there's more than one organization, there only needs to be one. Life and community organizing and nation operations have never been like that. But what we can have is operational unity. What we can have is principled unity, where people come around an idea. And a time will come when there are things that are going to gather traction and other things that are not. And it's for our people to know that is what they potentially should be coming around. And sometimes these things come as false flags.
Yes.
So that is also important to note. But the thing is, even if there are varying ideas around reparations, the point is that the people, everybody should feel a sense of responsibility and feel a duty to participate in whatever they feel they need to come around. Because the kind of best strategies, tactics, actions, and approaches are the ones that will gather traction in the future.
Understood. And if I may then, and if I may maybe put a number of questions to you, to which ordinary women and men, young and old, will put to me when discussing reparations. So the first question that always comes up is that, yes, but that's in the future sometime. Right now, I'm hurting. What are these organizations doing to help us now?
Right. So again, that is why we have a range of things happening in our community, because you know, there are things that are concerned with different parts of our own life cycle. You know, nobody says to the neo prenatal unit, why aren't you dealing with teenagers? Because they know they're dealing with the unborn child, and that's their specialism. Yeah, that's their specialism. So what we have been as African heritage communities is very good at service delivery. We are very good at setting up things for different types of needs. What we are perhaps less good at is actually coming together around a strategic approach to addressing our needs in the long term. So there's a lot of addressing stuff now, and actually firefighting and reactionaryism is something that unfortunately characterizes a lot of our responses in the community. So there has to be someone with the long vision, the long game, who is planning for posterity. So for me, that's about my unborn grand and great grands, great great greats, because we may still be here having these conversations if we don't plan for them. So some things have got to be about the here and now, and some things have got to be about the next 100 years or so, if we are here in the next 100 years with the ecological crisis that is facing us at this time, and living in the way that we live now. We may not, the next generation unborn yet to come, may not be living the same way that we are living. So, you know, you can't just do one or the other. You have to deal with the here and now. You also have to deal with the future. And that makes sense to me.
And I acknowledge you're, of course, 100% correct. But of course, to engage our community, there needs, of course, to be this reciprocation, both immediate, medium and longer term reciprocation, in order to ensure continued involvement. You know, it's a psychological phenomenon. And of course, what I'm hearing, of course, on the doorstep is, if I do this, can I afford to do it? You know, I've got to work, got to support my family, and so on. Okay, and I suppose it comes into another area of interest. It's how well resourced our organisations are. Mm-hmm. And of course, in the GAC, of course, we've got a membership and we've received donations. I'm going to assume both the March Committee, African Connections are run along the similar lines. Okay.
Yes, yes. It's very important for us to maintain autonomy, agency over our own areas of activity, because we know that funding streams make us, in the first instance, accountable to funders, yes, rather than to our people. And we also know that that can somehow be a distraction for us. Although we need resources, it's actually can turn into something where actually we're not serving our communities, because, you know, you have to serve your so-called funding master in the first instance. So it's important for our own communities to invest in work that they know will never be funded. And African liberation is not something that will be funded, neither we should be seeking funding for it under any terms. That is just a ridiculous notion for me. So yes, the African Connections Consortium, we tithe into the organization on a regular basis. And we also support other work that we're involved in outside of ACC, but connected to it. And yes, the African Emancipation Day Reparations March, of which I'm co-chair, we rely on donations and also putting money into it from our own pockets.
Yes. And I want to say to you, in regard to the March Committee, thank you. Thank you for what you do. It's had a powerful impact on the community over some years, you know. The only other organization that had comparable impression on the community is, of course, the Black Lives Matters campaigns. They're campaigning both in UK and internationally, but that's a different strand of work, of course. But the level of impact that I'm concerned with, the level of youth involvement as well, you know, which is another aspect of this as well, which I've got an eye on. You and I will talk about the future because of our age group. Sure. We want to prepare the future, but if the majority of our young people are in Black Lives Matters in this broader campaign and not in the reparations, but then you could say, you know, I've been at a meeting recently where the two were seen to cohabit the same space quite happily. But there's not going to that, because that might be a different this conversation. I want to keep I want to keep pursuing the March Committee. As you know, being a trustee of the Global African Congress, working with the March Committee is written into our work program. It's written into our work program. So we are, it's unanimous, we're obliged to, okay, and for good reason. Question I want to put to you is that we have been marching on the first of Messiah. Forgive me, when I say first of Messiah, just for those who are not familiar with the terminology, I'm referring, of course, to the 1st of August. Okay, and I'm going to ask you, Adejenda, to explain the term Messiah. Why is it called the 1st of Messiah?
I think perhaps credit for that goes to the Al-Kebulan revivalist movement. And it's about reframing the month in which His Excellency Marcus Messiah Garvey was born, which is the 17th of that month. So it becomes a month that we honor him and his contributions to nation building and beyond. So rather than refer to some Roman emperor during the month, let's elevate our own heroes and sheroes. So the entire month is not dedicated to Augustus, but is dedicated, livicated to Marcus Messiah Garvey, hence the term Messiah for August.
Okay. You communicated that so well. See my order? That's why you should be a professor. So let me continue with that. So it is important. We have been doing this for some years. And of course, observe the numbers are wavering, okay, which suggests that we've reached a junction point. Okay, our audience are communicating to us. You know, if this were a business, you know, the customer is the focus. What does the customer need? Are we satisfying the customer, our community? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's my question to you. The numbers are wavering. Notice this phrase lastly, and the collaborative ventures seem to be changing as well. Explain why is this happening and what steps will the March Committee with others seek to address it?
Okay, so it's worth me just going briefly back into the history of this seminal day in our calendar that goes beyond the UK. And the first March in 2014 was organized primarily by Rastafari Movement UK, RMUK, and they worked and collaborated with several organizations who gave financially and gave their labor and everything else, and other contributions in kind to make that happen, which culminated in a rally in Lambeth Town Hall as opposed to Windrush Square. After that first year, RMUK decided they did not want to continue to organize that. They felt, according to what I've heard on Galaxy Radio back then, that they had made their point, achieved their objectives. And so, but there was still an appetite amongst some of the organizers and the general African public that should continue. And so in 2015, some of the organizers from 2014 joined with some other people, including myself, who was asked to co-chair a newly formed African Emancipation Day Reparations March Committee, who then formed a partnership with the Stop the Maangamizi We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign, who then re-established a petition on change.org, because the petition from the previous year was kind of shelved by RMUK in their kind of decision not to carry on. So come 2015, a partnership between the March Committee and the Stop the Maangamizi campaign was formed. And that was absolutely necessary because we need to be marching for a reason. And the Stop the Maangamizi has campaign goals and wider strategic goals that we could then, as a March Committee, hang our hat on, so to speak. So, you know, there needs to be tangible reasons. And so there was a set of aims developed for the March Committee, such as showcasing the work of, you know, various reparations organizations, but also to have this sense of a show of strength and determination to stop in the Maangamizi and to let the general public know that we will not be going away until we secure reparatory justice. So those 5 aims were created, and the partnership was established. And so the March Committee have had a function of organizing the day and doing general reparations awareness stuff, which points towards the seminal day. The Stop the Maangamizi campaign, on the other hand, have been doing wider strategic work, legal work, extra parliamentary work, and international work around the campaign, which has the broad strategic goal. And we must understand that for the Stop the Maangamizi campaign and for the March Committee, reparatory justice is about the restoration of our nation. It's about the establishment of what we call Ma'atubuntuman, our futuristic nation, in a climate of global justice, because we cannot exist as a repaired people with chaos going on around us. So we need to be able to establish our world within a world, within several worlds that exist that are basically not going to trouble us, you know, so they need to be put right as well. So where was I? So that is the overarching goal of the campaign. So we talk about, well, I talk about reparations is repair nation. Okay, if you want to have an understanding. And so we need to have a sense of what that looks like. And it's not just about one area of people activity. It can't be just politics. It can't be just economics. It can't be just education. It has to be, it can't be just law. It has to be all those 10 areas of people activity that Nita Fuller and Mama Frances Cresswellson talked about. And within those, there has to be attention to our planet, of which as African people, we are the original custodians of, yes. That is fast going into a state of demise that we need to pay attention to. So that is the overarching destination for the reparations campaign as determined by the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. However, there are various, if you like, if it's a journey, okay, let me put it like this. You have service stations on the journey, okay? And you stop at them for various different reasons, but you must understand that those are not the destinations. So one of the strategic goals of the Stop the Maangamizi campaign is to establish an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. And that is pretty much why we have been delivering that petition to Parliament every year since 2015. And the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry is an administrative mechanism by which we seek to funnel and carry out an investigation into what is it that has happened to us, what is it we need to do next in order to form a series of reparation plans and strategies that actually then begin to implement our repair, okay? And some of that work is about us coming together as African people and nobody else. And some of that work is about interfacing with non-Africans, as you would do if you're delivering a petition to Parliament and establishing an all-party parliamentary group on African reparations.
Right, and it's difficult to argue against that proposal, and it's equal. As was said to me more recently, but of course, unless we control the narrative, control the data gathering and the analysis, okay, whatever a parliamentary investigation will arrive at will be distorted by those who are in control. And therefore, asserted to me, and this was a teenager, in fact, she was 17 years old, in fact, we should finance this ourselves. We have the skills, we've got the experience in producing reports of the caliber that will guide all reparations organizations. We should do it ourselves. Why would you want a parliamentary investigation?
Okay, so there are two dimensions to reparations. We talk about internal and external repair.
Yeah.
And so, again, and it was said a few weeks ago on Dr. Abu's show, it was said, and it just so, I think, was so correct. We are addicted to dichotomous thinking. We tend to think about, if it's not one thing, it's one thing or the other, right? Why can't it be both? Why can't it be somewhere in the middle? What are the nuances of what we are talking about? So when we talk about internal and external repair, there are things we must do alone. Let's talk FUBU. There are things that we must do for us, by us, yes, right? As the internal dimensions of secure and reparatory justice. But there's another dimension about holding perpetrators to account, okay? And those perpetrators are still holding on to our resources. They are still arresting our development. They are still desecrating, pillaging all our resources, and are still leaving our people in a state of disrepair even now. This is why we talk about stopping the Maangamizi before we even begin to repair the harm. So we can't just be in a huddle by ourselves. We need to be contesting the power who misuses their power to still subjugate our people.
Indeed.
So that is why you need that two-pronged approach. It isn't one or the other. And actually, a commission of inquiry, what the Stop the Maangamizi campaign are seeking to do, is a type of inquiry that actually has never happened before. So it's not going to be simply a report. We have several reports out there already that speak to our overrepresentation, whether it's mental health or harsher sentencing and stop and search and school exclusions. So we already know some of the current manifestations of the Maangamizi. What we need to be able to do is come together and tell our own story, because what has happened is that all those reports have divorced the African experience from its history. So none of those reports are talking about these things in terms of being legacies of the Maangamizi, legacies of enslavement and colonialism. They just talk about these so-called ethnic minorities and how they are failing in this or overrepresented in that or absent in this and underrepresented in X, Y, and Z. That is not what is serving our purpose, because that just points to this whole idea around equality, diversity, and inclusion, which is not an African-centered agenda, which doesn't serve our purposes when you're talking about African liberation, okay? And that's a completely different thing. So we need to be able to research our own family histories, and this is one of the things that I will be recommending, okay, as a way of going forward and preparing ourselves to be witnesses and make testimony as to our own story and talk about the situation that we are in as a result of the contemporary legacies of these history. We need to also document from our own perspective the ways that laws and policies and whether it's foreign policy, etc., have impacted on our people. And it's not just about here. It's not just about the UK. So a commission of inquiry pulls everything together, and we are not the subjects, but we are the drivers of the narrative, which is why part of that needs to begin with supporting the recently established all-party parliamentary group for African reparations, that the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, through its educational arm, the Maangamizi Education Trust, is a secretariat for, okay? So there are different ways that we need to tackle this. There's absolutely reasons why we need to have cultural privacy and talk to each other, but we can't do this just by talking to each other.
Absolutely right, absolutely right. And again, hopefully I wasn't inferring that was the case, but let's take this further, because obviously from a strategic point of view, and I'm a strategic thinker, what you described is spot on. It is spot on. Now, of course, I talk about the consortium and us, how we collaborate, because clearly the March Committee cannot do it by itself.
Right.
It requires the whole of the reparations movement to share that common aim, common purpose. Okay.
Right, and if I can just stop you there, my brother, because this is the mismatch in expectations, because I've already clarified the March Committee is not a campaigning tool. It facilitates the 1st of August, Messiah. It facilitates the necessary kind of promotion and education and awareness raising in order to make that a seminal day. The Stop the Maangamizi campaign are the campaigning arm as a separate organization that we are in partnership with. So people need to manage their expectations around what the March Committee does.
Understood, and thank you for that further clarity. So, of course, for the delivery of the broader aim, the parliamentary inquiry, of course, for that to happen, will require extensive lobbying of MPs, or elected representatives. And I know,
and then some, my brother, which is why it needs resourcing. Even if you compare, okay, not even talking about reparations now, not even talking about truth and reconciliation, anything like that. Just look at any commission of inquiry. Remember, I said this is a type of inquiry that hasn't happened before. These things take months and years. They take thousands of pounds, okay, to establish, and it takes a whole lot of organizational and departmental organizing. So we need to be clear about what it's going to take, what our role is as African heritage people in driving this, and compare that to what we already are doing and not doing, because we're going to be talking about something that is a long game in establishing, a lot of resources, a lot of time. But if we look at, for example, how we engage with, maybe the work of GAC or the 1st of Messiah, we're not resourcing our own work. And as you talk about numbers, we're losing numbers because people don't have that sense of things happening fast enough for them, or whatever reason, without actually saying to themselves, what can I do to expedite this whole campaign?
If I may intervene at that point, and that's a really important point where we do need to continue to look at this, because I'm seeing a trend not only here, but in other organizations across our communities, across the country. And you're right that it's the individuals who are not seeing the long-term aims and purpose that have been established. And of course, the individual is living in today's time and today's experiences, and I suppose I would always say to organizations, well, look, you need a short-term, medium and long-term aim. And you've clearly outlined the long-term aim, and that really is long-term. Right now, of course, there are socioeconomic issues that we're grappling with. Okay, and of course, in my experience, were you able to feed someone so they can finally eat, if they're not struggling to eat, they're more likely to affiliate with a more medium-term objectives. So, and it's in no way criticism of the Amalgamated Committee or indeed any other reparations organization who have these long-term aims. I completely get it because of the resource dimension that's involved here, both in terms of personal time, energy, and of course the financial resources required to deliver these long-term campaigns. And I wonder, are there short-term aims that you want to highlight that listeners can get involved in to see, to realize? Please.
But before I answer that, this is the thing. People have got to realize that they can make a contribution to the different stages, the short term, the stuff they can do tomorrow, next week, the stuff they can do next year, and the stuff they can do in the next 10 years. And it's not for those organizations, it's not for GAC UK, the Stop the Manganese campaign, the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, the International Network of Scholar Activists for African Reparations. It's not for those entities to do all the work. Just like we started our conversation, there's service delivery elements of this. There's strategy, legal, parliamentary elements. They can all run together, but they can happen in parallel. It's not one or the other. One of the things that would have helped us is to achieve 100,000 signatures on the Stop the Manganese petition on change.org, because that would then trigger a debate in Parliament, which would move us closer, and we could all rally around this debate and show our own MPs and our own councillors in our constituencies and wards that this is happening and this is important to us, which is why the Stop the Manganese campaign had a postcard campaign where you can, all you had to do was sign it and put a stamp on it and send it to your MP, asking for them to support this call for what we call the APSITAJ, the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice into the legacies of enslavement. So that is one thing that people can do. They can work with the campaign to form outreach teams around the country, okay, in major cities where we are, and even ones where we're not are, because we need 100,000 signatures. We're not saying we need 100,000 African signatures. That is one thing that people can do. The petition is there at change.org, and it's just over 20,000, but they're not all online. A lot of them are paper signatures. So when you go on change.org, it will not show that figure. Okay. So that is one thing that we can do, because that is going to open a door for us when it is debated. You know, when it came to a kind of a supplementary associated issues like Windrush and all those kinds of things, and amnesty for deportees, and those figures were reached on petitions very, very quickly. But we tend to kind of miss the overstanding of the long-term aim. And with that petition, please, when you sign it, read it first, because most petitions will give you half a dozen lines, very simplistic. And unfortunately, social media has kind of dumbed down our attention span, but we need to have an overstanding of what we're dealing with here. It talks about definitions of genocide. It talks about how the Manganese is manifested in currently on our people. And it talks about the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice. So that's another thing that we need to also be doing. As we say in the March Committee, education is preparation for reparations. So we all need to take some responsibility for finding stuff out.
Thank you very much for that. Those are two interesting elements. And of course, speak to our people on the doorstep, directly engage, understand what their needs are now. Okay.
Yes, that's the other part. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So that, as I say, is, you know, everybody has got to play their part. My initial example: if we have someone dealing with prenatal, then we've got to have somebody else dealing with youth. It's not for reparations organizations to be doing all the work. And I don't think they are doing all the work, because, as I said at the beginning of our interview here, we are quite good at service delivery, doing work for elders, doing work, education with our young people, and in our independent African schools. We do stuff around mental health, particularly for our brothers, but also our sisters. We do work around poverty interventions as well. So this is stuff that we've always done. And food, clothes, and shelter, if you want to talk about, you know, the hierarchy of needs, then those things still need to be done, because when you can eat, then you can fight. Absolutely. And so there's no denying that, but I'm saying, don't expect reparations organizations to be doing that as well. Form your organizations, deliver your services to strengthen our people so that we can be fed, be clothed, and have shelter, so that we can engage with this fight. Because we know we've got other things impacting on us, with the energy crisis, with Brexit, with the ecological crisis, inflation, and all of this, right? So we know that people are firefighting generally, and that's not just African people either, you know. So we have a double whammy of dealing with the historical legacies of our condition, but also the contemporary ones that have come about through Western systems and what they have allowed to develop under the system of capitalism as an agent of global white supremacy.
So in fact, if I may then, and just take forward what you described, you're right. The service delivery side, we are quite good at it. It's simply not recognised as such, and it's not generally recognised as being reparations work. You know? And that may be the other, disjunction point, which I discussed earlier on, because I see many organisations delivering outstanding work. They are reparations organisations in all but name. Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because certainly community self-repair has to be an angle of what we do, but many organizations are not doing that with a view to this is what we need to do to restore our nation. They are doing it because there is an unmet need for an individual at that time. So there's a difference between having a collective strategy, which is saying we are doing this because then we want to. So, for example, in our independent African schools, some of them are about, we are doing this because we want our children to have better grades and a bit of African culture and history, yeah, in their curriculum, because that's a deficit, yeah. If they are there saying, we are educating you as the next leaders of the nation, we are educating you around institutional development, okay, and channeling you into things that lead to the restoration of our nation, that is a different type of Saturday school or independent African school. So it's about the premise by which you're operating on that may make you a reparations organization or just a service provider.
I understand you, and it is interesting, as I said, with your interesting mind and perspective on this. And of course, one of my objectives, of course, is to bring the various factions and elements within the community into common aim and common purpose. Okay, and they will approach this from different angles, of course. And I've described the short, medium, and long term. Okay, and of course, the long term objectives, they are of course clearly well, they're well defined because they've been intellectually robustly reviewed, analysed, and ensured that they are fit for purpose. Okay. But these short and medium term objectives, which are about setting the scene. Yeah. We agreed early on that a woman or man who's now got a full belly is more likely to be receptive to our messages than one who hasn't. Okay. Which is why I refer to those organisations who are purely service providers, okay, as reparations organisations in all but name, because they're satisfying an aspect of what is to prepare someone to hear the essential reparation messages and understand the relevance to themselves, their families, and their community. Okay, so that
and actually, Brother Martin, you know, there are organisations, you know, who wouldn't accept that label because A, they don't understand what reparations is, B, they do not see themselves as African, because part of the impact of the Maangamizi is our disconnection with our heritage and the development of Afrophobia, which we have also internalized. So I still maintain that there's a distinction between those who are working even at a service delivery on a long-term collective aim, rather than those people who are also involved in civil rights stuff, which is just about the people in their community, in their city, and maybe just in the UK. And so it's about rights and entitlements and achieving those within the UK. Reparations cannot be just about Africans in the UK. So again, that is another dimension that separates this kind of service delivery stuff from reparations activism.
It is good talking to you, and maybe I should have had other leaders of reparations organisations here in the same room, because it is interesting. So it may be unfair for me to focus just on yourself. In my role as an elected official, of course, the other communities don't see the differentiation that you're describing. Yeah? I was born in the Caribbean, but I could go into certain places in Africa and it would assume I'm a native. Okay, so it's right. So you understand, therefore, that the nuances, and if you're interested to hear what you've described, those who are deliverers but are civil rights as opposed to reparations, and I say, oh, hold on a second. They don't understand the concept because they've not been taught it, but we need to make them receptive to the ideas and why reparations in its various forms is the central part of their personal success as human beings, and indeed their families and future families' success as human beings. Okay.
Absolutely. And some people have been doing that work for decades.
Absolutely.
And some of us have been doing it less so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that that isn't happening. It's happening within the resources that the various campaigning, awareness raising organizations, and I don't just talk about the ones I'm involved in, are doing. The other part of the responsibility is for people to take responsibility for their own learning and finding stuff out as well. And I think we've become a little bit lazy with that one, and we expect things to be handed to us on a plate.
Yep.
But seek and you shall find. Education is preparation for reparations. So there's a wealth of information on stopthemangamizi.com, more so than on reparationsmarch.org. And people who haven't been on there because they ask you a question that you go to the homepage and you find the answer to.
Yes.
We must do better.
It must do better. I say this often, it's such a regular chime at the moment. I'd like to encourage people to investigate. I like them to seek out advisors who have got some experience or academic credentials in the field, rather than speaking to amateurs or would-be aspirants. So I completely get that. But as strategic leaders, though, my other, okay, that is our reality. That is our reality. And as I said, it's maybe a bit unfair because it's just yourself here at the moment, but we've got to have that discussion as strategic leaders, how to encourage greater responsibility amongst the African masses for themselves, their personal development. So it's not just being handed to them, that they are taking responsibility. If I was to share some of my own experience in this regard, is that initially what's been sought is clear leadership. A leadership that seeks to empower through the words that is uttered and the actions demonstrated. Okay. And by that I mean, and just for clarity's sake, because I know that I don't want to become, and I'll try to avoid sounding in any way academic, but I'm not, as far as possible. I am an elected politician, and our role is to harness the power of the people so that we are empowered to make bylaws or acts of parliament, which ultimately will govern people's lives. Okay, but we can only do that effectively if we hear the voices of the peoples, not just some of the peoples, as broad spectrum of the people. Okay. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So In my role as a convener for the African Connections Consortium,
Let's talk about
what we did. I mean, we were established in 2016 as a means to elevate the voices of African heritage communities in Bristol, where we are, okay, and to seek substantive representation and power in city decision making, in city affairs, and that was prompted by, you know, the fact that we had our first African heritage elected mayor in the city. And so we worked with the Global African People's Parliament to establish ourselves as a body. Our strapline is beyond tokenism, seeking power, not just presence in city affairs. So we have worked with the Stop the Maangamizi campaign and local politicians to actually draft a version of the motion initially drafted by the Stop the Maangamizi campaign around atonement and reparations and atonement motion. So we worked together to draft a motion that was put to full council. So we worked with Labour Party, we worked with Green Party politicians to draft this motion that was initially drafted by the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. What we did was Bristolize it a little bit, because each of the motions that were passed, there's one in Lambeth, there's one in Islington, and hopefully, Martin, there'll be one exactly where you are in your ward. I don't know where you are, but you should have been the first, okay? You should have been the first, okay? But we have Islington, we have Lambeth, and we have Bristol, which came about on March the 2nd, 2021. So within that, you have 4 resolutions, and 2 of those resolutions speak to the primacy of African heritage people that should lead and be respected and supported to lead their own reparations goals and be supported by the supporters, be they the institutions that have harmed us historically and continue to do so. Okay, so that's part of the work that we do. We've got a meeting with our mayor next week around our community assets. Okay, so there is different interfaces with this work. So some of it is community facing community. Some of it is actually engaging with those things, because those atonement and reparations motions give us leverage to hold local authorities to account. And we know that Bristol has a particular history when it comes to the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. So, and we are there, we are everywhere. So, you know, this is parts of work that other people could do in other cities in conjunction with the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, because we need more of those motions being passed, and we need to have a sense of, that's when, you know, if GAC is doing something and we need to work with you, that will happen. If something is happening that you need to work with the Stop the Maangamizi campaign on, that should also happen. It doesn't mean that you collapse your organizations and come together and blah, 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 because we have different approaches. We have different aims and we have different visions of what reparations as a destination looks like. And I still say that we as a people need to do more thinking, not only about what the destination is, what the steps are. And we're suggesting, the Stop the Maangamizi campaign is suggesting an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry is an important part of the reparations planning process. So we in Bristol, African Connections Consortium, are also contributing to a global aspect of our, what we call Pempanze Mpango, our own Bristol reparations plan, okay? And that contributes to other plans that are being developed outside of the UK also. So this is something that, you know, we need to localize it, so that those things that you're talking about in terms of local services and what people are doing to survive day to day are taken into account and are somehow orientated also to a longer term vision around reparatory justice, which means, and it should put an end to this nonsense around you have 2 years of funding to do this, and you know, you've got to operate from your yard because, you know, somebody has our resources, which means we can't even have our own buildings and so on and so forth as part of the plan. And we're unable to connect with our brothers and sisters around the world because of our lack of resources to do so.
And thank you for that. And that's a really good summary of your work in Bristol. And I've got to express my admiration for your achievements in Bristol. I have to say, well done. And of course, you pointed out that in my neighbouring borough of Lambeth, they also passed a similar resolution. In Southwark, it's a slightly different approach. We have the Southwark Stands Together policies, okay, which has a similar outcomes to what you described, but it's just a different tonal intonation, I suspect, but its impact is exactly the same. All aspects of council service has been reviewed or continues to be reviewed through the Southwark Stands Together prism to ensure that the discrimination, Afrophobic behaviour that is pertinent in all institutions and no less in Southwark Council are rooted out and are dealt with. Okay.
Could you send me a link to that, please? I'm not aware of that.
Don't you worry, I most certainly shall. And I think really importantly is that it's affected even our Labour group. We passed a resolution to amend our standing orders, update our standing orders to reflect our national rule book, that a political party, local political party, should reflect the communities that it serves. Here in Southwark, of course, we have nearly half the population who are non-white. Okay. Consequently, this year, Southwark Labour was able to select and elect a record number of African heritage and Asian councillors in the history of the borough, nearly half the councillors or so. If the ONS figures continue to increase the percentage of non-white communities in Southwark, in 4 years' time, we will update our standing orders to reflect the change in demographics. Okay.
Well, that's good at some levels because we know not all skin folk are kinfolk. And so when we talk about substantive representation as African Connections Consortium, we're not talking about optics, because a lot of us, because of the Maangamizi, no longer know how to serve the interests of their people and no longer occupy those places of power and influence in the interests of our people. So to me, that's key. It's not about the numbers of Africans in those places. It's about whether Southwark Stands Together has specific reparatory justice goals and mentions the word reparations. It's about whether those African heritage councillors and others reference reparatory justice and see that as a core priority within their own acts of service. Yeah, because otherwise you're just going to have black faces in white spaces, and that's never helped us.
This is an important point. There's some things here that should be said in public, others should not. What is clear is that the strive for equality of opportunity, okay, is an important target to achieve.
Only you would need to qualify that, my brother, because again, we need to talk about equality in what terms, equal to what, who, and to what effect, and what are the opportunities out there that we want equal access to, because these are the kind of conversations that we have when we talk about substantive representation, and when we talk about pushing forward on African heritage community interests. We need to have a critical lens on phrases like equality of opportunity, because I question whether in every aspect that should be our goal. let's qualify that. And I don't mean now, but
I know.
Let's not just assume that that's what we want, because for a lot of us, we have been socialized and conscientized into thinking that equality is our destination within the current system of white supremacy. To have a better, more comfortable existence is what we want, and that means better access, better job, more money, better house and care, and that is not reparative justice.
I've got to say that's why it's useful to have had a number of leaders here with that dialogue, because it is important, because of course short, medium, and long term.
Sure.
Okay, but that's how I think of these things, and the labels, the banner attached to an action, okay, may well determine the success or otherwise of that action. Okay, there are some strategic considerations to take into account. Again, further elaboration, maybe another time, another place. And then my third point here, and I think this is why, and I'm now conscious of time. You are such an engaging person, okay, and I haven't actually officially opened the line, but anyway, but never mind. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter for now, because I think we're going to have you back. Because I suspect there's some ongoing dialogue here. But of course, we want the reparations movement to move forward. We need to expand our numbers and therefore be able to harness the talent within the community. We must not allow the movement to wither on its vines, a slow death. So we need renewal. We need young people to be enlightened by the messages that you've announced today. Okay, we need to make sure that those of middle age recognize the benefits to them of supporting the broad reparations movement, and of course the elders to provide their wisdom, okay, to communicate to them, because they don't have a hank. So only concern is that the young ones and those who are parents are not making all the mistakes, or not all the mistakes of the past, and they're therefore there to counsel them and to advise them. So I think in terms of short, medium, and long term.
Sure.
And the short will not look like reparations, but for all intents and purposes, the outcome is to create a mindset that the individuals are prepared and ready to accept the concept of reparations. Because I venture to suggest that possibly the majority of listeners and viewers who will view this program on YouTube, for example, will not have been prepared yet, okay, and will not completely understand much of what you described. Okay, I've got a few decades of experience, okay, and that's what I mean about the junction. Yep, the junction point. We've got to decide how to spread the word, and therefore we've got to become even better at communicating to the uninitiated, those who have not been taught as children the truth about ourselves and our circumstances.
That must continue, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I know we're almost out, in fact, we're almost out of time. What would be your closing message? How can people contact you? What would be your closing message to listeners and viewers who are being introduced to this subject, and many will be introduced to this subject for the very first time? That's my audience generally, those who are being introduced to these subjects for the very first time and are not yet able to determine the benefit, in particular the immediate benefit to themselves. What would be your message to them? Yeah.
So, I would seek out further information, and I think a starting point is to go to the reparationsmarch.org website. Our homepage talks about the activities of the March Committee and its associated, its partners and those it connects with, and the work that has been happening, particularly over the last 10 years. So there's a section on the homepage about our achievements, and within that, there are links to other pieces on other websites that will give you further information. But if you have, if you want to get a sense of an overview, I would start there. And then I would graduate to stopthemaangamizi.com, because as you said quite early on, there's lots of language that we need to familiarize ourselves with, lots of concepts, and yeah,
okay,
if you like, different models of understanding our world, different praxis, and so all that information is on stopthemaangamizi.com. There's a plethora of articles for several years that are on there.
Forgive me for interrupting, Mailda. I know this is going to sound really odd. I'm going to ask you, for the benefit of those who are hearing these words for the very first time, to spell some of those words. So stop the Maangamizi.
Oh, no problem.
Just spell it out for them. Just nice.
So Maangamizi is MAANAGIMGIZI.
ZI. I'm going to ask you just one more time, please. One more time, please.
MAANGAMIZI. That's Maangamizi. And I would ask people, in terms of an immediate action, to go to change.org and punch in that word, stop the Maangamizi, get to that petition, read it, and sign it. And then from there, if you like, graduate to reparationsmarch.org, our homepage in particular, which talks about the achievements and the summary of the work that's happened over the last 10 years as a starting point before you graduate to stopthemaangamizi.com.
Can I ask, is there a section devoted to young people, particularly those who may be in university or just starting work?
Not directly. There is work going on with young people, but what we tend to do is establish different structures and entities that work is happening through. So some of the Stop the Maangamizi campaign work is also supporting a global majority versus the UK government campaign, which is a campaign that is youth-led and challenges the government in terms of our right to life, in terms of what its lack of attention to the ecological crisis. There's also the youth wing of the International Network of Scholars for African Reparations, INASAR. The youth wing of INASAR is called
Slow down.
Africa. Okay, sorry, it's because I'm watching your 10 o'clock thing. Yeah. So INASAR, INOSAAR, the International Network for Scholar Activists for African Reparations, has a youth wing. They're also on social media as Rep Africa. And Africa is always with a K. So that's the youth wing. There's also the Global African Reparations Forum of London, which is a youth-led aspect, which is interfacing around the Lambeth motion in particular, and is also doing internationalist work, internationalist solidarity work with African people in Abya Yala, in Southern America, and in Ghana. So Garful UK is also on Twitter. Garful is also on Facebook. Like African Connexions Consortium, we don't have a website yet. So those are youth-led structures that the Stop the Maangamizi campaign and the Global African People's Parliament are supporting and working with as structures that they have also established.
Thank you so much for that, and I want to encourage young people who have been stimulated, triggered, encouraged by what you've heard to get involved. Get involved. This is the time to get involved. And lastly, I did want to go address the issue of resourcing. You used the word, an interesting word, tides, earlier on. Okay.
Yes. Yes. We put money in there each month.
Yes, I might just say standing order, but it's okay.
Yes, that is also correct. So yes, we contribute to our own liberation. as African Connections Consortium, and we put money into the campaign, our own money, and we put money into the reparations march organizing.
How can listeners do the same if they want to do so?
On reparationsmarch.org, you will see bank account details. You can go to the homepage. You can also go to the Reparations Rebellion tab. One thing we didn't talk about was the shift from marching to groundings, but that can happen another time, because that actually has been happening since 2020, not just last year or this year. So the account details for ASR funds is on the reparationsmarch.org website.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you in
for that.
advance for your contributions.
And I would encourage, and I'll produce a little clip later on around that to encourage listeners and viewers to have the bank details ready, and they could see the bank details standing order. Or if you like, initiate tides so that this organization can continue their work for years to come. Self-funded, not relying upon government money in order to pursue an agenda which is essentially an African-centric agenda, which, you know,
yes, and one which they would never support and would use every opportunity to derail.
Indeed, it would be strategic suicide. I completely agree.
Indeed.
So be assured, I think I am already making contribution. I should be making contribution in many places, but I'm already making a contribution to this campaign. It is absolutely necessary. I'll be training in my duties as a husband, a father, a grandfather, and of course a good friend to many, if I were not doing this action. And in this environment, my elder, I'm referred to as being a motivator, a demotivator, he says, because we translate our words into action. Okay, so this is the outcome. All programs should produce actions, and we get you back. We discussed the progression because we are moving forward. We are never standing still.
That's right.
Moving forward, never standing still. Our time is almost up, but you've been so stimulating. There need to be a part two, but I do want to talk about the grounding to far greater extent. Okay, because there is much to be said. There's much to be said. As I said, there's certain what we should say in public, others we should reserve for our own private debate. But there are a number of important public messages. I want you and indeed other reparations organizations to discuss around the grounding, to ensure the grounding is not seen as a passive gesture, but is recognized for the proactive activism that it is a representation of. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, and you and I can agree that and communicate that quite well. So I'll set it up in a few weeks' time, but it's an important strategic step forward that the African communities are recognizing that, forgive me, we recognize the importance of reparations. We recognize that living here in Britain, it proposes many challenges because the impact, social, economic impact of the transatlantic enslavement of our ancestors and the enrichment of this country and the propaganda and imperialist mentality which still pervades this country's peoples is in fact killing us.
Right. We charge genocide.
It's genocide, yeah. You see, genocide is a strong word. It's
a correct word. It's an apt word.
It is. I'm a politician, you see. So I want to make sure that the audience eyes remain open, you see. Because what I want to make sure is that those who are perpetrating this crime, particularly those who are unconsciously perpetrating the crime, are allowed to wake up. I don't want to frighten them too much just yet, but I do want them to wake up. I do not accept any argument to suggest that it was unconscious bias.
Yes, because it has to start from somewhere before it's into the subconscious. Absolutely, you have to be
We
taught
understand
something.
each other. Okay, so
Yes, yes.
so that's why the Southern stand together, and our sending link is an important step forward as a step towards a broader reparations campaign, and there is
Mhm.
a synergy between the two. I want to thank you for being, I knew you were always going to be, an outstanding guest. Okay, this recording of this program will be repeated throughout universities across Britain and beyond. Okay, I want to encourage particularly young people to make contact with yourself, because you are able to articulate our condition and strategies to remedy our condition so remarkably well. I just don't know why you're not be given prizes and accolades every day. I just don't understand. I realize you don't,
My brother,
I know you don't need it, but
we work with the guidance of our ancestors, and our ancestors work through us. So this is where this is all coming from. And you know, I have this phrase, not you shall be known, but you shall be grown by the company you keep. And I'm in very good company, so I give thanks and praise.
oh, I like you. My elder, thank you for being an outstanding guest today. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Okay.
We will together ensure that the aim and purpose of the Reparations Masters Committee is met.
Sure.
Want to make sure the broader aims of the reparations.
Of the International Social Movement for African Reparations.
Thank you. Said it so well. Are also met, because we have no choice. We've got to do this for our children's sake.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ashe.
Ashe. Thank you. Thank you. May the strong serve you well. May the strong serve you well.
Likewise to you, my brother.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care now. Guidance.
Guidance.
Thank you, everyone.
And listeners, there you have it. A wonderful guest. Okay. And what my guest exemplifies are the enormous brain power, intellect that's within the community. And we've got to continue to harness this brain power, harness the intellect, so that together we all make the difference. And as Professor Fenton said the last week, you know, we are all the change makers. We're all change makers, okay? Each of us contributes a small amount to the big change that is happening right now. No matter all the regressive forces within the community attempting for us to close in, no, we've got to become solid, clear thinking, you know, compassionate, thoughtful, you know, forceful, but yet subtle in our approaches. Okay? And we have many allies. I'm going to say again, we have many allies. Okay, we have many allies, and we should ask and embrace those allies, because together we all will make the difference. Until the next strong, to next Saturday, I remain the motivator, okay, where we translate our words into action, and remember, success is ours for the taking. Take care. Till the next program, I am yours. Praise be. Ashe.